Over the past few years, we've had a lot of books coming out on the subject of 2012. And here are some of them. You've got 2012, Year of the Apocalypse, Armageddon 2012, The World Cataclysm in 2012, Doomsday 2012. It sounds like bad news, doesn't it? There are also some optimistic ones, not so many. We've got Let Your Light Shine for 2012, for example. And there's more. They come out in several different languages. We've got Greek, French, German, Spanish, Japanese and Turkish, fiction and non-fiction. This Greek one translates as Jesus will return in 2012. But just in the past year, we've had a real rash of these books. Again, very much orientated toward a catastrophic interpretation on largely. There are a few more optimistic ones, and yet more, including one from Whitley Strieber here, which is now being made into a major Hollywood film. So, in fact, I've just prepared the update for my website, and since the last update went out in October, 35 new 2012 books have been announced on Amazon and other sources. Aren't you worried? So anyway, the point is, there's a hell of a lot of information out there. Who's got the time or the money to investigate all this information? Well, I put a lot of time in myself, and the solution is, of course, just to buy this one book, and that will answer all your questions. That's weird. I put something else on there this morning. It's disappeared. We'll see as we go along whether the other bits appear or not. Anyway, it's available in the foyer. If they run out, I have got some more in my car. End of commercial. I've got another. Oh, there it is. I've got 2 slides. All right. Here's the web address. If you don't want to invest in the book, all the information is on the website. Well, not all of it, but hell of a lot. And I've just got this little book coming out in a couple of weeks, a little pocket version for those who haven't got a lot of time. I know none of us have got a lot of time. So terms you may or may not be familiar with that describe this event that is coming up soon. In Terence McKenna's novelty theory, we'll go through a lot of these as we go along, so you know what I'm talking about, but briefly, on Terence McKenna's time wave, we have maximum novelty ingression, is what he calls 2012, or alternatively the 0 date. The auric time scale, it's called the end of the world. That's my own little joke, which you'll understand as we go along, or convergence is what the developer of that time scale called it. In the complexity consciousness theory of Teilhard de Chardin, he called it the omega point, or the birth of the Christosphere. In Peter Russell's version, it's called the white hole in time, or maximum time compression. In Robert Anton Wilson's information doubling theory, he originally called it infinite Jesuses, but it's been modified to infinite Merlins. You'll see as we go along why. Remote viewing community, they call this event the discontinuity. In Ken Carey's system, he calls it the quantum awakening. Alice Bailey referred to it as the telepathic interplay that will annihilate time. The Maya would have called it the creation day, or alternatively the end of the 4th sun or the end of the 5th sun, depending on which myth is representing it. The Aztecs would have called it the end of the 5th sun, which is the sun of earthquake. The Hopis would call it the end of the 4th world, or the beginning of the 5th world, or the emergence. The Incas called it Tarepe Pacha. The Zulus call it the return of Mushoshonono. And the Maoris call it Kahinga Tiarai. But these may be more familiar to you: the event, the birth of Gaia, birth of the geopsyche, dimensional shift, the transition, doomsday, the second coming, the ascension, judgment day, the golden age, the galactic orgasm, even. So what is it all about? Why is everybody focusing on the year 2012? Well, most people know it as some kind of what they call the end of the Mayan calendar. That's rather a generalization, as you will see as we go along, but briefly, the Maya had several calendars. They had a sacred calendar of 260 days, which is based on the human cycle of gestation, because when a woman misses her period, there are 260 days, according to the Maya, until the due birth date. They used this 260-day calendar as an oracle and a sort of character definition system, a little bit like Western astrology. So the day that you're born on gives you the characteristics of the number of the day combined with the day sign. So there are 13 numbers combined with 20 day signs to give you the 260 combinations. Dot for 1, a bar is 5, goes up to 13, then recycles. The same structure can be used to measure out two other Maya calendars. The main one we'll be talking about is the long count. That also consists of 260 units, but each unit in that case is not a day, but a katun, which is a period of just under 20 years. So if each square is a katun, each column is called a bacton of just under 400 years, and 13 of those bactons makes up the 13 bacton cycle that started in 3114 BC and ends on the winter solstice of 2012. It's taken Mayanists 100 years or so of study to actually understand not only how the calendars work, but how they correlate to our calendar. And only in the last 40 years or so have they really come to an agreement that we're talking, there's still a few that think it's a couple of days off from this, but most of them now think winter solstice 2012, the 21st of December. An interesting facet to this is that something Arguel's pointed out is that if the Zolkin, the 260-day calendar, represents human gestation, and then we map the long count, the 13 bacton cycle onto there, if you notice that this corresponds with the beginning of human history in 3114 BC. You've got the first dynasties of Egypt, the first stages of Stonehenge and the building of the megaliths. You could say that this is then a map of planetary gestation, sort of individual gestation on a planetary scale, indicating the birth of some sort of global organism. So you can also correlate it to Gregorian and Maya dates, beginning of each bacton and the beginning of each katun of the final bacton. The other thing on the screen there is the time wave. Now, this is how I got into this subject back in early 1980s. I read a book by Terence and Dennis McKenna describing their trip down into the Ecuador rainforests to experience ayahuasca. No one except for a few anthropologists had heard of it then. But as a result of that experience, Dennis became a psychopharmacologist because he was fascinated the way that the molecules had intercalated into the DNA to get all this information out. And Terence went back and studied the ancient Chinese oracle, the I Ching, because he'd been given this information that encoded into this oracle. The I Ching incidentally means the Book of Changes. He was told that this Book of Changes somehow encoded into it was all the change that had happened in the universe from the beginning of time to the end of time. When he analysed it, to cut a long story short, and then combined it with our calendar, it turned out that this is the baseline, which is maximum novelty, new things that have never happened before. Unlike normal graphs that go up, this one goes down. It only hits the baseline at the beginning of the graph, back at the beginning of time, and the end of graph, which turned out to be 17th of November 2012. Now, I was studying this book for nearly 5 years before I found out that the Maya from the other side of the world, who had a solar-based system, the I Ching, there's evidence that it was originally a lunar-based calendar. So you've got calendars from two sides of the world. One of them is about 5,000 years old. The other one's at least 2,500 years old. Both have a sort of termination point within 34 days of each other, and that's only just around the corner from us now. So that's what got me into the study of this. We should have had a sound bite on there.
This long count calendar and this 13 Baktun cycle is set to end on December 21st of 2012.
That is the voice of John Major Jenkins. We'll be looking at some of his work as we go along. He's one of the seminal researchers who has decoded exactly why the Maya were pinpointed 2012 with the end of their calendar. We'll get into that. So, first of all, let's just talk about a few prophecies. We have the Maya prophecies, which I'll cover more in detail in a moment, but we also have the Hopi prophecies from the people that live in Arizona. And every year they have a ceremony in an underground chamber called a kiva. It's called a wuwuchim ceremony. And this represents the ascent from a previous era into this era, and then the ascent from this era into the next era. Because their mythology says that there are 4 of these past eras, well, including this one, they call worlds. And each world, there's a transition point between it called an emergence, which they represent with the Cretan labyrinth symbol, exactly the same as the Cretan labyrinth symbol. And it's got something to do with a womb, a mother's womb. So they again see this as some sort of birthing process. The ladder represents an umbilical cord. This hole in the floor is called the sipapu. That represents where they came up from the previous world into the 4th world, the current world. The kiva itself represents the womb world, the current world, the 4th world. At the end of the ceremony, the shaman comes down the ladder and says, "I am the beginning and the end." He then takes off the star that he's wearing on his head, and everyone in the kiva then takes the stars off their heads, takes all their clothes off, and tries to rush up this ladder or umbilical cord into the next world as a kind of undress rehearsal for the transition. The Hopis had a series of prophecies, 9 prophecies, which would happen before this event comes about. There's only one of those prophecies left to be realized, and that's the appearance of the blue star Kachina, which is one of these dancers who will dance in the plaza, and he represents a blue star that will be seen in the sky. There are lots of theories as to exactly what that might be. It's been suggested recently that it might be Comet Holmes. But the prophecy also says that at that time the Hopi ceremonies will cease. And my friend Peter Borlase is in the audience here, has just been to Hopi land, and he was very privileged to stick his head in the top and watch one of these ceremonies. And he confirms that the ceremonies haven't ceased, so the blue star Kachina is probably not Comet Holmes. The Zulu prophecies, this is Credo Mutwa here, and he says in the year of the Red Bull, a huge planet will come back into this solar system after a long absence and will cause a global tidal wave and that kind of catastrophe. He calls it Mushoshonono. The year of the Red Bull is 2012, surprisingly, or not. The Maori people, they have a creation myth which says that at the beginning of time we had the sky and the earth, which they call Rangi and Papa. They were in a close embrace, one on top of the other. As a result of the embrace, they had several children, and the children, the gods, forced the sky up, and that's why the sky is up, and we are down here. The second part of the myth says that one day when we're too busy to remember the old myths anymore, and we're too distracted, the sky and the earth will come crashing back together in a movement they call Kahinga Tiarai, which translates as the curtain will fall. Sounds like bad news, sounds like the end of the play, everything's all over. But in fact, a young Maori got to interview the elders, and it turns out that two of these words have mutated over the years. The word curtain should really originally have been translated as veil, and the word that's been translated as fall originally meant dissolve. So this word veil is the same word they used to describe the veil between life and death. So the veil will dissolve between life and death, and they have also said that this is now due to happen in 2012. The Kero people, this is a tribe of descendants of the Incas that live up high up in the Andes Mountains. They have a prophecy called the Pachacuti prophecy, which means the earth and time turning over, because like the Aztecs with their sun and the Hopis with their world, this word Pacha has a double meaning. It can mean the world, as in Pachamama, and it can also mean a time period. So it's a world era. So the world era, the Pachacuti, will turn over, and the formula is the Pachacuti will last 3 years, followed by a 7-year period of preparation, and then a 12-year period of manifestation. And then will occur Charipe Pacha, which is the golden age, or the age of meeting ourselves again. And in 1990, Juan Núñez del Prado, who'd been initiated into this group as a Kero Paco, which is a priest of the Kero tribe, he had never left Cuzco until later in 1990, but early in 1990, a delegation of Pacos came to his door and said, "We've read the signs, the Pachacuti starts this year on the 1st of August. And so that means 3 years later, in 93, was the beginning of the preparation. 2000, beginning of the manifestation, and 2012, 1st of August, is the beginning of the full-blown Pachacuti golden age, the Charipe Pacha. The Tibetans, they have a myth or legend about Shambhala, the invisible city, which is ruled by lamas, and there will be, well, there's two versions of this. The long version is about there's 32 lamas. It depends how you count them. But basically, when the last lama comes, his name will be Rudra Kakrin. And the Hindus call him Kalki. He will end the age of discord, do away with the barbarians, which apparently it's got to do with a change in our psychology. And at that time, it's said that Shambhala will become visible. Some lamas are now saying that this Rudra Kakrin is currently ruling at the moment. So, in other words, this event is imminent. So it seems to correlate with all these other prophecies. And then that will be the start of a golden age. In our religions, the Abrahamic religions, in Judaism, you're familiar with the 7 days of creation. Well, the rabbis say, in their interpretation, each of these days is a day of the Lord, which it says in the Psalms, a day of the Lord is 1,000 years. This is represented on the menorah, 7-branch candlestick, so that you can count back if each one represents a day. And as Bishop Ussher did, if you add up the genealogies in the Old Testament to find out when Adam and Eve were around, it comes out around 4000 BC. So then you can calculate 4000 to 3000, 3000 to 2000. This is called the servant candle, when the Messiah was supposed to appear. And of course, Jesus just about made it on there, because it's 1000 BC to 1 AD. The Jews don't accept him as the Messiah, but that's another story. 1 to 1000 AD, 1000 to 2000, we are now here between the 6th and 7th candle, and that, of course, corresponds to the Day of Rest, which is the 1,000 years of peace, the Messianic kingdom, in which is the return of the Messiah, and it's another golden age. Everyone is predicting a golden age round about now. In the Christian version, you have this in the book of Daniel. It mentions the abomination of desolation and the taking away of burnt offering from Solomon's temple, and some numbers. Some people have said that the abomination of desolation, if that represents the first temple mosque on the temple site around 677 AD, it then says there's 1290 days, and Daniel openly gives the clue that a day represents a year. 1290 years after that brings us to 1967 and the Six-Day War, and it then says those who survive another 45 days or years will get to see the end of days. Then, of course, that brings us to 2012, 45 years after 1967. And of course, in the Christian myth, you then have the descent of the New Jerusalem, another kind of invisible kingdom becoming visible. In the Islamic version, they wouldn't agree that the mosque on the temple site is the abomination of desolation, but they use exactly the same verses interpreted slightly differently to say that the abomination of desolation is, in fact, the Six-Day War when they lost control of this site. Well, not the actual mosque, but Jerusalem and the surrounding territories. So, in their version, of course, again, this adds to 2012, 45 years on from that. In their version, that's the day when all good Muslims will go to the Garden of Delights, and I believe it says there's 72 virgins on tap. But that does imply that there's a lot more women there than men. Another reason for why 2012, altered states of consciousness. It's recently transpired that people coming back from all these different kinds of altered states have been talking about 2012, having known in most cases nothing about the Maya calendar or these other connections I've just talked about. We've several people who've been abducted by, apparently by aliens, or had out-of-body experiences, NDEs. I know of 5 NDE people, that's near-death experiences, who've come back with a message about 2012, usually saying there will be earth changes and a consciousness leap for mankind. Generally, that is the consensus. Deep trance meditation, people have come back talking about 2012 from that before they knew anything about it. Ayahuasca, these are the ingredients for ayahuasca and other sacred plant experiences. This is what McKenna went to the Amazon jungle, the Ecuador rainforest to experience. He actually didn't have this version of it. He had a psilocybin mushroom combined with the ayahuasca bark, which gave him a 34-day hallucination, which he shared with his brother. And then you have remote viewing. People, this is like psychic spying, they used to call it, where it's kind of out-of-body experience where you, I know somebody, ex-military, who's been to a special talk on this where they tried to get to recruit people to do it. He didn't do it in the end, but you go out of your body and you go forward to see what's over the next hill or investigate areas that they want to know what's going on there. These people can also travel forward in time, and several of them have spoken about 2012 being a transition point, and the same with people in having lucid dreams, which can be provoked with one of these Nova Dreamers, which is a spectacular thing, which I did try briefly, which records your rapid eyeball movement and then just gives you little subtle flashes which wake you up into the dream and it becomes real. All of these things, it's now been discovered, have something in common, and that is this molecule, dimethyltryptamine. Rick Strassman did a study on this and found that at birth, at death, and during mystical experiences, our pineal gland in the center of the brain secretes this hallucinogenic molecule, which is the same molecule that is in one of the constituents of ayahuasca. The vine itself contains harmine, and that's been found also to be secreted by the pineal gland. So it's now been found also that the Maya were taking some kind of version of ayahuasca because the bark of the ceiba tree combined with this mushroom that they're known to have taken and the toad venom from one of these poisonous toads, that combination would give a very similar effect to what is got from ayahuasca. So somehow this molecule gives access to information about the year 2012.
This thing exists at a certain point in the history of this planet. It exists on the morning of December 22nd, 2012 AD. whole ball of wax is going to shift dimensionality.
Well, that's the voice of Terence McKenna there. You couldn't make out the words. He's saying this thing is going to exist on the morning of December 22nd, 2012 AD. He's modified that by 1 day in his later versions to get it onto now what is known as the solstice and corresponding with the end of the Maya calendar. But he says this whole ball of wax is going to shift dimensionality. He thinks there's going to be a dimensional shift. This is a look at the time wave he constructed. You can see here, if you enlarge the n bit, it is actually a fractal of the wave because the same shape is encapsulated within the wave at 26 levels, where each level is 64 times greater than the one below it. That then enables you on a computer to map out all the change in time from subatomic event levels, the time it takes for an electron to go around the nucleus of an atom, right up to universe length, time span, beginning of time to end of time. That's why his computation says this is some massive change equivalent to a kind of end of time. And he knew nothing about the Maya calendar either when he did this calculation. I won't go into how he did it, it's very complex. But here is how he mapped it onto human history. He used this spike near the end of the wave to correlate to the explosion of the bomb at Hiroshima, a supposedly novel event that's never happened before on planet Earth, as far as we know. And then 64 384-day lunar years later, because there's 384-day lines in the I Ching, 6 times 64, and then the line hits the baseline on 17th of November 2012. He later modified it so that it would agree with the Maya calendar, just moved it forward slightly. But this is from the software. You can see here, you can adjust the end date. That's set for the 17th of November. When you've got the software, you can muck around with it. And then the peaks and troughs on here indicate habit and novelty. And there's a lot of discussion on this as to how real it is or isn't, but there are some very good hits with historical events correlating to peaks and troughs on this wave. And it's very much like, it's got a lot of things in common with this, which is the Auric timescale that I mentioned, developed by a Russian mathematician called Sergei Smelyakov. He came up with this by studying the Maya long count calendar and trying to see if it had a resonance with phi, the Greek golden section, 0.618, blah, blah, blah. This is something that occurs throughout nature in the construction of our bodies, the way that plants grow. And he's fascinated by phi, and he tried to see if there's any resonance in the Maya calendar. He made a slight miscalculation on his first version of this, as a 64-page mathematical paper. I spotted the problem, I told him about it, and he had to rewrite the whole paper, unfortunately. But it took him 2 years. While he was doing that, I came up with this diagram, this time centering it on 2012 with the correct start point. And something amazing happened, because these things he calls bifurcation points, where the spiral changes direction, they correlate to significant events and the birth of avatars. What it generated was the 18th of July 1945, which is only 2 days away from the first explosion of a nuclear device on the planet, the Trinity test. That means it's more significant than all his other bifurcation points. And he ended up being quite impressed with it and publishing a new version, which he was good enough to put my name on as well. So that gives you an idea of what the end of the world means. The end of that spiral. And totally independently, Peter Russell has looked at the development of man and analysed history and come up with a very similar spiral, where we're at the centre of the spiral here, which theoretically goes on forever, and yet it doesn't. It's a kind of paradox. And this is another one from Russell. Darwinistic evolutionary interpretation. You've got the missing links, but these are called quantum, what are they called? I haven't written it down. There's some sort of there's some term that defines this to biologists. Quantum transition point is a quantum leap into another stage where development goes along fairly smoothly and then suddenly speeds up. And by that, we are right at the point of one of those transition points now. into a sort of an evolutionary, quantum evolutionary leap, something like that. And he's also analysed the development of people working in industry, in information industry, and then the consciousness industry, and the whole lot just goes vertical around about 2012. So Russell was quite amazed by this and how it corresponds to McKenna's time wave and the Maya calendar. And Robert Anton Wilson, again, independently from all that, started this study on information doubling, where you measure the amount of information known to man, which he called 1 Jesus originally when he started it around 1 AD, like where Joules, where you name the energy unit after the person who had to do with the inventing of it. He called it 1 Jesus worth. Anyway, he later modified it, so it started at 40,000 BC, and then it got to 1 unit around the time of the Bronze Age, so I changed it to Merlins for that reason. But basically, the thing goes vertical at 2012, and that's when we get infinite Merlins. Knowledge, the accumulated knowledge of man, just goes off the map around that time. So, in 2006, Ervin Laszlo brought a book called Chaos Point and told us about 13 unsustainable situations. Wealth and power gap, 900 million people in poverty, oppression of females, increasing terrorism. There's fundamentalists on the increase. Neo-Nazis appearing. Conflicts increasing. Military spending is on the up massively. Food imports are increasing and food reserves are dropping. Fresh water supply, there's 6,000 children dying of dehydration every day. As a result, 50% of the world has not enough water. Pollution's on the increase. Human rights are being lost. And, of course, we have global warming, climate change. Well, you might think global warming is a load of pants, and you're partially right. See, if you look at this trend, what we've got around 2012 is a potentially hazardous situation. So going on, chaos theory, this is what Laszlo says in his book. If we analyze human history according to chaos theory, because humans are like the weather, chaos theory came out of studying the weather, which is hard to predict, but it is calculable by some complex mathematics. And if you apply those mathematics to a study of human culture, you can calculate trends. And he says that humanity is this chaotic system. In chaos theory, we have strange attractors which lead to a tipping point or a chaos point where the whole system then diverges in one direction or another. And he then has analysed history and sees 4 phases. A trigger phase where we had a tool production phase, which is the Industrial Revolution. Then an accumulation phase where that increases, production increases, and we start to have an effect on the environment. And then there's the decision window where those effects on the environment, pollution, and the lessening of resources gives us a stress leading to the chaos point, which he puts at year 2012, funnily enough. And he says this is totally independent of anything to do with the Maya calendar. That's what he claims in the book. Sees it as an amazing coincidence. And his solution says that we have past eras, somewhat similar to what the Hopi, the Aztecs, and the Maya say. The last three eras, the mythos, well, the last 2 eras, the mythos to logos transition. Sorry, mythos to theos was the Paleolithic to the Neolithic. Then the theos to the logos was the Neolithic to the Iron Age. And each of these transitions developing a new paradigm or a mindset. We're now looking at the transition from the logos to the holos, which is holism, where you get the big picture and everything's connected. And he says there's 3 types of people in the USA. You may disagree with this. He says, my buzzword for them are the rednecks, the yuppies, and the hippies. It's a bit of a very much of a generalization. But he says in the hippie group of people, which, like it or not, that includes people in this room. Well, you wouldn't want to be in the other two sets, I suppose. But he says that kind of ecological thinking and the altered states of consciousness generated not just by power plants and that kind of thing, but all the mind change technology that we use, even trance dancing and yoga and meditation, these things will bring about a new paradigm. And he says that the social activists amongst this group of people have the power to shift, when we get to the chaos point, to shift to a beneficial trajectory, break through instead of break down. But he also says that this will involve a new structure of society with 4 levels: local, national, regional, and global. So he seems to be saying that the solution to all the world's problems is a one-world government. Now, it turns out that Laszlo is the founder and president of the Club of Budapest. The Club of Budapest is affiliated to the Club of Rome, according to Ian. Well, it's openly stated in his book. The Club of Rome is a right-wing think tank, as Ian said. Just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they said that they were dedicated to bringing about a new world order by using climate change as a catalyst. Peter Russell, it turns out, is a member of the Club of Budapest. So that explains why Laszlo is using Peter Russell's material that we've just looked at. So it all sounds a bit dodgy. Is 2012 being hijacked to bring about a one-world government? So if we look at other conspiratorial interlude, especially for this conference, if we look at the Great Seal of America, Jefferson said he was given this in the garden of the White House by a man wearing a hooded cloak. Of course, it later became printed on every dollar bill. So you could say that when the man in the hooded cloak gave Jefferson the Great Seal, and Jefferson said, "Yes, I got this from a man in a hooded cloak," that was passing the buck. But some people have pointed out, if you look at that date on the bottom, 1776, date of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and you then analyze this according to the Maya short count calendar, where 20-year periods, that's Katun 1776, because they named the Katuns after the last day in it, and if we translate it to our calendar, we could call it Katun 1776, and then you get Katun 2012 on the top. Going back to the remote viewers, Ed Dames, who called this event the discontinuity, remember this? Remote viewers were a military operation. In other words, they've got a connection with the American government. Event timelines change at this discontinuity. Joe McMonigal says Atlantis will rise 2012 to 2014. Here's another remote viewer. And a third remote viewer, Sean David Morton, says the tribulation period will start in 2012 and go on to 2018. Slightly different versions from 3 remote viewers. And then we have the Montauk experiment, which came out of the Philadelphia experiment, where apparently they tried to make a warship, a battleship, invisible in the World War II. The SS Eldridge disappeared from its dock, was teleported to another dock, reappeared, and it was a horrendous situation where people were half embedded in the deck and a lot of people died, so the story goes. But 2 people apparently jumped off the ship and were time warped into 1983. It's getting pretty far-fetched. But they say that they then became part of the Montauk time travel experiment, and this whole event had set up a 20-year time loop. So Al Billick, who claims to be one of these people, originally called Cameron, he says in their experiment, time travel experiment, which was through a device that looked something like this, which was the, well, it's from 1960s sci-fi serial. And he said that beyond 2012 will be a dreamlike reality. Now, Stephen Gibbs, who claims to have invented a time travel machine, he says, well, using the technology that they used for this thing. He says, beyond 2012, complete wipeout of everybody. Now, Frisell, he says the reason that they can't get beyond 2012 in the Montauk experiment is because that's when the last time travel experiment will occur. So, I mean, they're all slightly different versions of this. Is this some sort of disinformation here? Dan Burish, if you go to this, these people are doing cutting-edge research on 2012. I think they're collecting interviews, and you can see hours and hours of interviews with people who are ex-government and really putting their necks out to give information. Well, Dan Burish is an ex-microbiologist from MJ12 and Area 51. He says he was shown a yellow book by J-Rods. These are apparently us in the future. They appear to be aliens, but they actually come back from the future to try and change something, because they say that in this yellow book it says that in December 2012 a pole shift will decimate the Earth, but they come back, do something, change things a bit, and that will then give us a divergent timeline paradox, which means several different parallel realities are set up, and we have it's not clear which one we end up in. But it seems to correspond to what Dame said about there being another timeline around 2012. And in Burish's words, in 2012, the sun will shower the Earth with waves of energy bound to the Einstein-Rosen bridges that are clumped together at the galactic equator, and that all of the natural stargates will turn on, causing something wonderful to happen, but that if we don't disable man-made stargates first, the excess energy will cause the pole shift, first magnetic, then geophysical. The result will be minimum death toll of 4 billion, survivors split into 3 alien races. It's stretching credibility a bit. I mean, this could be part of a disinformation campaign. Don't know, but I mean, it is fascinating to watch these videos. And in a 2012 documentary that came out called 2012 The Odyssey, which I was also interviewed on, they mentioned these things: the Georgia Guidestones, erected by somebody who called himself R.C. Christian in 1979. I told Andy, and he thought I said R.C. Christian. Anyway, it says in 4 ancient languages, "Let these be guidestones to an age of reason." And in 8 modern languages, it gives 10 new commandments. It's also a calendar, because the noon sun shines through it onto the ground, and you can tell what day of the year it is. The stones are oriented to the solstices, and that slot there aligns not only to the celestial pole, but the solstice sunrises shine through it as well. So it's a little bit like, well, they're calling it the American Stonehenge. Now, if you look at these 10 commandments, the first one is maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Then it's guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, unite humanity with a living new language, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court, avoid petty laws and useless officials, balance personal rights with social duties, prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite, be not a cancer on the earth, leave room for nature, repeat, leave room for nature. It sounds at first reading, 10 minutes. It sounds at first reading like a very benign and hopeful outlook there, but it turns out that R.C. Christian's written a book which is in the local library, and he actually says in it that this monument is dedicated to Thomas Paine, who Andy mentioned yesterday. And as he said, Thomas Paine had connections with the Freemasons who set up the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution. And these people were all founding fathers, a lot of them were Freemasons. R.C. Christian, some people are now saying on the internet, R.C. Christian is a code for Christian Rosenkreuz, who was the mythical founder of the Rosicrucians. And the Rosicrucians are a Masonic style of society. Originally I thought, where it says maintaining the population at 500 million, I thought that implied there would be a catastrophe of some sort that they knew about. there'd be 500 million survivors, and that from that point we should maintain that level in order to be, and not to be so-called cancer on the earth. But you could look at it another way. You could say, does it signify an intent to eradicate over 9/10 of the world population? This is what they're now saying. So this means that this whole Guidestones thing is one of these 2012 conspiracies that's now turning into a conspiracy. Does avoid petty laws and useless officials mean replace them with military police and imprisonment without trial? Does balance personal rights with social duties mean a loss of human rights? Is the age of reason the novus ordo seclorum? Is it the New World Order? Well, you could. I mean, David Icke yesterday was talking about joining the dots up and finding the elephant in the living room. You could join the dots up here and come up with something like this. Now, yesterday we had, I've forgotten his name. One of the speakers yesterday, I apologize for getting his name for a moment, but he was talking about, yes, Tony Gosling, thank you. He was talking about the Freemasons having a belief based on ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt is evil, he says. They also are interested in the Kabbalistic tree of life, therefore the Kabbalistic tree of life is evil. Well, by that kind of logic, you could say that because Thomas Paine was associated with the Freemasons and he was also a Quaker, that by this connection, the Quakers are therefore part of this conspiracy. But you can also see that by the same logic, I've had to include myself in the conspiracy. So what I'm saying is, there may be an elephant in the living room, but when joining up the dots, don't include dead flies and other old raisins that are on the carpet. I haven't really got time to go through through that. That basically is explaining that the Maya were tracking the precession cycle with their long count calendar, and it's explained in all their myths that around 2012 we have a conjunction of the solstice sun with the galactic equator, and that is it's described in their myths as the birth of Hunabku from the mouth of the jaguar toad or other kinds of reptile, which represents this dark rift in the Milky Way on the galactic equator. So there was also a short count calendar, which consisted of 260 units, but in this case, each square would be a tun, a 360-day year. And the whole thing can be shown like this as a circular cycle, which starts on Katun 11 Ahau and comes back to Katun 13 Ahau here. So the whole thing starts there, goes around a 20-year period in turn, and then comes back to there. Well, in the Chilan Balam prophecies, which were written down after the Spanish invaded, there are some prophecies. It's been thought by the Mayanists that these refer to that cycle I just mentioned, the 13 Katun cycle, and therefore were insignificant because they're all over and done with. But in fact, there's a linguistic clue in there that's been deciphered by a linguist who translated one of these books, and that clue shows that these prophecies relate to 2012. One of the prophecies says, in Katun 4 Ahau, we are now in Katun 4 Ahau, which ends in 2012, the Quetzal shall come, the green bird shall come, Arcantanal, that's the temple standard, will come, blood vomit shall come, that's probably the Maya pestilence. Kukulkan Khan shall come with them for the second time, it is the word of God. So it's talking about a return of the snake and the feathered snake god Kukulkan Khan, who has a connection with the Indian concept of Kundalini, which is a combination of earth energy and sky energy. When it unites in the pineal gland, in the crown chakra, you have an annihilation of ego, or samadhi. There's now evidence that the Toltecs had a religion very, very similar to that. The origin of the Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl religion was basically very similar to that concept of raising energy up the spine through the chakras. The linguistic clue I was talking about is here. It says, in the final days of tying up the bundle of the 13 originally Katuns on 4 Ahau, well, as you can see here, in the 13 Katun cycle, shown in colour They ended on 11. They started on 11 Ahau and ended on 13 Ahau, unlike the end of the 13 Bacton cycle, which ends on Cthulhu 4 Ahau. So in other words, when they lost the knowledge of the long count calendar at the end of the Classic era, they kept the prophecies and reapplied them to the simpler short count calendar. Therefore, that should read at the end of the 13 Bacton cycle on 4 Ahau. In other words, this is about 2012. The end of the world shall come, the Cthulhu of our fathers will ascend on high, the valleys of the earth shall come to an end. For those Cthulhu's there'll be no priests and no one who believes in his government without having doubts. Yes? I recount to you the words of the true gods when they shall come. So we have a prediction of the return of the gods in 2012. The nine shall arise in sorrow, alas, and when over the dark sea I'll be lifted up in a chalice of fire. To that generation there will come the day of withered fruit, there will be rain, the face of the sun will be extinguished in the great tempest. Now this is good news. Ornaments is gifts. There'll be gifts, will descend in heaps. A good gifts for one and all, as well as lands from the Great Spirit wherever they settle down. And Bacton 13 shall come sailing, figuratively speaking, bringing the ornaments which have spoken from your ancestors. Then the god will come to visit his little ones. After death will be the subject of his discourse. So I've got to wind it up. I've just got to tell you about this because this is the confirmation that what I've just spoken about was a correct interpretation, because the Tortuguero prophecy, this was, came out in 2006. It comes out that they've known about this for years, and the archaeologists were reticent to talk about it because they didn't want to be involved in the whole end of the world discussion. But basically there is, from the Classic era, an inscription that talks about 2012 with an accompanying prophecy. It, unfortunately, is slightly damaged, so there's bits missing, but it says, these are the three calendars that define 21st December 2012. It will be the descent of the 9 support gods to the... So we're talking about the return of 9 gods, which I've spoken of in those Chilam Balam prophecies. So that just shows that what is probably going to trigger all this, the best case scenario we've got from all the information at the moment, is that the solar system is traveling into a band of magnetized plasma as it goes around the galaxy. That, according to Russian research, there's a similar structure on a solar system level. We're talking about a galactic version of this. As the solar system goes into one of these bands, which it seems to be doing, this is building up on the edge of the heliosphere, bleeding through, affecting the sun, which will bring about all those changes that Peter was talking about to the sun, which then goes not only to planet Earth, but all the planets in the solar system are showing changes in their atmospheres and the magnetic fields. I haven't got much time to go into that, but basically there are 8 million adults in the USA who've had near-death experiences. And when they come back from this experience, they're talking about a change of characteristics that is like a shortcut to another evolutionary stage. These are some of the people shown who've had this near-death experience, and they're all talking about the year 2012. Daniel Brickley in particular said there will be earth changes, and it's a window of opportunity for us to change our consciousness. And between 2012 and 2014, he predicts a magnetic polar shift. And he also predicted lots of other predictions that have come true, including the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Chernobyl incident. So just briefly, I'll go through these changes that people coming back from NDEs show that are in common with psychic children. Basically, this is what we're looking at for the mass change in mankind that may be open to us in this window of opportunity. Heightened appreciation of life, focused entirely on the present moment, greater feelings of self-worth, increased concern for others, less concern for material things, success and self-image, less dogmatic, more spiritual, openness to reincarnation, seeing one truth behind all religions. Telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, synchronicities, out-of-body experiences, spiritual awakening and growth. And this guy, Kenneth Ring, he's done a massive survey on NDEs, and he's come up with the theory saying that he thinks that according to the Sheldrake's formative causation theory, the morphic resonance, a little bit like that 100th monkey myth, it will be easier for humanity to complete the paradigm shift when we get to a critical number of people, because there are 8 million adults and it's going up all the time. People have had NDEs because of resuscitation technology. We're going to get to a point where there's a critical number of people who've had this NDE experience, and that psychology will transfer itself to the whole human race if you're open to it, and gives us a possibility to move on and into a breakthrough, if you like. Okay, that's all I've got time for, folks.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Geoff Stray.